Welcome, everyone, and thank you for stopping by for a conversation that I'm anxious to have with my friend Brian Edwards. Brian, you and I have traveled many a mile together through many a year, and it's good to see you.
It's great to see you too, Larry. It's been a long time, too long.
Well, thank you for checking in, and thank you for adding to this conversation. I really value your perspective here because you've been a career law enforcement officer and you've always been a man of deep personal faith, and I have appreciated both of those things. So why don't you start by introducing yourself to those who may not know you. Just tell us a little about your career.
All right. I retired last summer after 26 years with the City of Waynesboro Police Department. It's here in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley. In those 26 years, all with Waynesboro, I had different roles, as most officers do who spend their lifetimes at one department. Started as a patrol officer, then went into the schools and taught the DARE program, the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program. Spent many years working with school resource officers. Spent many years being the department's public information officer, and that kind of gravitated into being more of a community outreach officer. Most of my career has been, though, a patrol supervisor for the Waynesboro Police Department. I finished up as a patrol sergeant, so I was responsible for anywhere from about 5 to 8 officers working on a patrol shift, and we worked rotating shifts. I was never solid daylights or solid graveyard shifts. I worked nights, and they were 12 hours, worked 12-hour shifts, nights, weekends, holidays, every day of the year. And those were probably the most challenging because of the uncertainty and of what we were dealing with, because we've seen a lot of trends, mostly in drugs, come through the valley. And with a growing drug situation, you have all of the secondary crimes that come with that. Could be crimes against property, but mostly it was crimes against people, and homicides, assaults, arsons, all kinds of dangerous kind of crime where people were hurt. So those were difficult years, but I was glad to end my career where I started, and that was on the street, because those are the best thing about this, is that you were able to interact more with people. And I love the city of Waynesboro. I love the people here, and I'm still here. And so it's been a good experience.
And now you're on the front lines doing what?
Now I thought after I grew up and said police work, okay, I'm done with that. When I turned 50, I said, I think I want to be a school teacher. So fortunately, I built a lot of strong relationships and followed through with some educational goals I had set for myself. And now I am the math teacher for the alternative education program for Waynesboro Public Schools and the Augusta County Public Schools. I work with students. It's actually interesting. I interacted with many of their families as a police officer. So now I am with the younger generation as their math teacher. And it's been also a very rewarding part of my job, or part of career path that I've been.
Well, thank you for your service, and both in this job and your previous career. So why did you choose a career as a peace officer?
Well, it was, back in the early 90s, and I've always had this sense, this moral sense about me that I wanted to help. It may seem idealistic and naive, but I think really it's why a lot of young police officers or a lot of young people want to start going into the police department to help people. You know, it is police work for the most part. Part of my career has always been an admirable profession, honorable. And, you know, I always remember what Mr. Fred Rogers said of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood: look for the helpers. You know, in times of crisis, look for the helpers. And the helpers are the ones that are running to the problem instead of away from the problem or the threat. So I wanted to be one of those helpers. And it was really what had guided me, and really throughout my career. Now, my stance maybe had gotten a little harder over the years, and maybe I was getting a little bit more frustrated, but still the underlying sentiment of being a helper really never faded.
That's important to know, because I think sometimes folks overlook the fact that that is why most folks in that blue line fraternity, if you will, that is why they go into that line of work, isn't it?
It really is. You know, one of the biggest testaments of that dedication was probably the terrorist attacks of 9/11. You had 323 police officers, or 323 firefighters, and about 77 police officers. You know, police officers don't have fire gear. We can't put out fires, but still, they were going into the building. They were going up the Twin Towers to help people. You know, they couldn't put out fires. They couldn't break down doors with axes. You know, they didn't have oxygen. They didn't have oxygen tanks, but they wanted to be with their firefighter brethren and help people and get them out. So that tells me, you know, that is a good, it was a very unfortunate time in our country, but it sure did reinforce what I believed, why most people become police officers and emergency services workers, is to help people.
That's a good testimony. And speaking of testimony, can you tell me how your faith has impacted that career?
Well, you know, early on, I was always a churchgoer. Police work, especially patrol work, is not always suitable for routine church attendance. You normally have to work at least 2 weekends out of the month. So as I was, you know, a young officer, just recently married, you know, I still went to church. You know, mostly the young teens and kids in my congregation enjoyed having me there, and my wife and I were youth ministers for a while at our church nearby. But then, you know, I didn't really pray. I didn't really have conversations with God as often as I felt I should have. When I became a patrol sergeant in early part of the century, around 2001, 2002, I felt a lot more pressure put on me. When you're a single police officer, you really only worry about yourself, maybe the person who may be riding with you, a reserve officer. When you're a supervisor and you're responsible for 5 to 8 other officers, many of them very inexperienced rookies, you feel much more pressure. You feel much more responsibility to look out for those individuals. And that puts a lot of pressure on yourself. So I was feeling stressed. I was feeling a lot more stress. I was not getting as much sleep. I had a lot more administrative work to do. And really, you don't want to go, if you don't mind doing a lot of paperwork, you shouldn't go into law enforcement.
Right.
Because it is constantly documentation. You have to be a good writer, researcher, communicator, write a strong narrative. and especially with being a supervisor. So I felt was feeling a lot of pressure on myself, and that was manifesting itself on the street. I was becoming very impatient when dealing with people in my community. And I was, I was never over physically aggressive with them, but I could tell that I was not. I was, a lot more curt, might sometimes even yelling and being very disrespectful. And I needed, so that was a point where I kind of had to search inwardly and say, the job's not going to go away. You've got 3 kids now, and I want to be here, but I've got to manage it better. I've got to manage it better. So I turned back to God and had daily communication with him. I prayed daily. My commute into work was about 8 minutes, and those 8 minutes, pretty much 7 minutes of them were talking to God, asking God, God, guide my leadership, guide my decisions, grant me wisdom, grant me perseverance through dangerous problems. Help me help these people. Help me to help these people. But most off, Lord, give me patience. I need patience, God, to do this job for these 12 hours. I'm tired. I didn't sleep well. God, I need you with me to keep me going so I can be effective. And, there would be times when I would just say over and over, God, patience. I need patience. And then there would be times during this process, I would feel his presence in me. I would feel him calming me, and I would feel this very good, comforting feeling throughout, just inside me. And it helped. I could go and listen to people, even people who didn't want to talk to me. I was able to be much more of an understanding, compassionate individual, be the Christian that I needed to be to do this job. Because, I'm not, and I never wanted to hurt anyone or definitely kill anyone, in the line of duty. It's not, that's movies, that's TV shows. You can shoot someone and then go out for a beer later, shoot someone, kill someone, 2 or 3 people, and then have a beer and not worry about it. I mean, that would have haunted me. And it haunts many officers. So my faith, having that connection with God is essential to being a police officer, to being in law enforcement. I am convinced that everyone in law enforcement, especially those who are on the streets like I was for so many years, have to have a strong faith, have to have a connection with God. It's not just important, it's imperative. It is a necessity because it's soothing, it offers clarity. And and I found myself not really asking for protection for my life. I asked God every day, and I still ask God every day, especially when I go in to teach, for patience. God, grant me patience. You need that faith. You need to have that. And I don't think many law enforcement officers have that. Do they see it as a weakness? Do they see it as not having time for it? I don't know, but I think that anyone who goes into law enforcement, especially in this day and age, needs to have a strong faith where they can have that communication. I always tried to wear a cross under this is the part that's touching my skin. So I had a badge and a cross. The cross was closer to my heart because there were some times when I would be losing my cool and I would feel the cross touch on my chest, moving on my chest, and that reminded me that it was a sign from God saying, calm down, and just feeling. Sometimes it was more of sometimes it was more of a soothing feeling that I knew that he was with me and getting me. Other times it was it manifested itself more in that physical activity of the cross of drifting across the skin of my chest. So I think, and that's just me. Everyone else may have their own ways to cope. And I think a lot of it, that's what, you can't spell cope without cop.
It's hard to imagine doing that job without that support.
It really, any job where, unless you're a completely isolated individual, anytime you have to have human interaction, in any workplace, even I continue those prayers going to school when I'm teaching now, because I know that, my kids are going to try me, and they do, but I have to exhibit patience, because one outburst, one losing of your temper, one manhandling someone, and you've lost credibility with those people that you're there to serve, and you shouldn't do the job. You should turn that badge in or have it taken from you, because that you have eroded not just the trust that they are supposed to have in you, but everyone who wears that uniform.
That kind of points us to another national and I guess worldwide conversation that's going on right now. You may have heard there's a little bit of unrest, protest, and conflict going on. Share with me your perspective on that.
Well, throughout my career, when I was a police officer, there were always, I started my career shortly after the Rodney King case in Los Angeles. That was, a very grainy video of the 4 officers beating Rodney King. And there seemed to be every year, even maybe twice a year, situations of when African Americans are mistreated by police. And I look at each one of those, and I always promise myself that I would not, because I've been there in those situations where my actions are going to be interpreted, reviewed, analyzed, and I would not do that. I told myself I would not do that for other police officers, other law enforcement, because you don't have the whole story in the video that you're seeing. Now, I will admit that in some of the situations that I've seen, there are some situations where it is a police officer's training that he or she is doing the way that they were trained. They're doing it the right way, and but the public does not perceive it that way, and that's and they look at it and say that's wrong. Then I've seen other situations where a police officer or a law enforcement officer has really made a very gross mistake. A tremendous error in judgment that has led to someone getting killed. And those are a lot of the situations that you see that they didn't intend to do that, but the outcome was someone died. And then I've seen those situations where it's just cold-blooded murder on behalf of the law enforcement officer. Their intent was to kill the person, and they did it. And those are the ones that are just scary to me that those are happening. But and I knew that I was never going to be that individual, that I was never going to kill someone cold-bloodedly. But it's those first 2 situations, especially that second one, where you're out there and you make a snap judgment and it turns out fatal, and either someone gets killed, either the law enforcement officer or the person that they're interacting with. What I saw in the situation with George Floyd in Minneapolis, I cannot reconcile that officer's actions in my head. I just cannot. I cannot see putting a knee on a man's neck for over 8 minutes. And I think that situation was handled well. The outcome was what needed to happen. Now, what happens in court is something totally different. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I saw that, and that it disgusted me, that police officer's actions. And for the life of me, I can't think of what he was thinking at the time.
Well, from your perspective, what would you like to say to those who are protesting?
For those who are protesting, I have always been an advocate for social activism, for peaceful social activism. I think that it's critical. I think it's how things get. I think it's how change is enacted. What are the there's so many great bumper or sayings that women who are well behaved rarely make history. And I think to have change be made, you have to get out there. You have to protest. You have to demonstrate. But it has to be peaceful. And my own children, my 2 daughters, participated in Black Lives Matter protests and not anti-police, but anti-police brutality protests, not just here in Waynesboro, but also in Richmond. And I'm very proud of them. I encourage them to do that. Because I think that, again, that's how change happens. And I think that if those who, you can't sit on the sidelines, you have to take a stance in this, because it's got to stop.
Absolutely. What would you like to say to the police, if you could, the ones, the folks trying to maintain order?
Well, following up on what I just said, I think the majority of the citizens who are out there protesting and demonstrating are doing it the right way. They have good intentions. They don't want to create. They don't want to steal. They don't want to burn. They don't want to destroy their communities. There are those who are going to take advantage of this kind of situation. That leads me into responding to the question you just asked. I would tell law enforcement officers, and I can speak. I guess it's important for me to mention, Larry, that being retired, I am uninhibited to speak more freely. I'm not representing the Waynesboro Police Department or any law enforcement agency. I'm just speaking on the perspective of a 26-year officer who recently retired. But you need to keep cool, let people protest peacefully. You need, and it's very difficult, because you hear the stories that you hear of officers who are stories of protesters getting roughed up by police, and then you hear of police not doing anything and buildings are getting looted. So you've got so it's that fine line where you've got to allow for First Amendment rights to be exercised, but maintain order. And then you've got that group in the mix that is going to cause problems. And again, it's on both sides. You have police who are agitated at what's going on. You have those bad actors. But I think many of the police officers are doing their jobs effectively. And I just ask the people that I still associate myself very closely with, law enforcement officers in this country, to be safe, treat people with respect, and just find your faith and talk to God before you go in, whenever you need to help you through these difficult times, because you're going to need God's guidance, His wisdom, and granting you patience to get through it.
People of faith, yeah, have that faith close to your heart. I wonder if you could speak to the people of faith who are kind of mystified by all of this, not sure what they should do. What would you say to them?
Well, definitely we need prayers. I pray not just for, I've prayed for George Floyd's family. I've prayed for those who have lost their lives to police actions. I prayed for the families of law enforcement officers who have died this year. There's been, from COVID-19 to the criminal acts of people killing police officers, there have been about 70 to 80 police officers who have died in the line of duty. I pray for them. I pray for those law enforcement officers who have to go out every day. I pray for my former colleagues here in Waynesboro, who I am still very closely attached to, and try to see as often as I can. Prayer's going to get you through this. We need strong leaders. We need strong leaders, not just in law enforcement, but in government, in our, in our faith organizations. We need to turn to them and say, and help them guide us through this. And, watch your rhetoric. Please watch your rhetoric. Words can be just as fatal and hurtful as tear gas, bullets, bricks, and rocks, and Molotov cocktails.
Yeah, well said. And that's something I've always appreciated about you is you're soft-spoken, you're well-spoken, and you speak from your faith. And I thank you for taking time to talk to us about this today.
Well, it's 26 years of my life that that was very important to me. And we are in a society that wants to be protected, but they don't want to be policed. And I ask that both sides, from law enforcement and our citizens, I live in the city that I policed for 26 years. My kids go to schools, I go to church here, I shop here. And I think what's important is that for a police officer, after 5 years, 10 years, or 26 years, I feel I can go anywhere in this community, anywhere, into any building, interact with anyone, and know that I treated people with respect and fairness. And I don't have to be ashamed of anything, of how I did my job. And my head's held. Will I encounter someone that I arrested at one point? Yes. Will I encounter someone that I had to use physical force to take into custody? Yes. Will I encounter someone that I've used a taser or pepper spray on? Yes. But I know that I handled that situation to the best of my ability through my training and my love of humanity. So I think that that's what's important for the law enforcement officers out there, to be able to make sure that they can do that, not just for themselves, but for their families too.
Once again, we thank you for that service, and I thank you again for your insights and your reflections today.
Thank you for being my spiritual leader for so many years, Larry. that you were there through some of my hardest years, and it was good to talk to you. And I needed you there, my brother.
Absolutely. We leaned on each other, and we still do.
Yes, sir.
Brian, God bless. Thank you again. And let's see if we can get together again soon.
Anytime, Larry. Anytime.